So what are some childhood experiences that can get into our psyche? Like that inner critic it's wormed its way into our psyche, right? And that's why it's so challenging to reprogram, because it's not like it's just a surface level thing. It is embedded in that psyche. And so it takes getting into that psyche to reprogram it. So what is one of those things that happens to us as children that could be in our environment that can really get into the psyche and start that inner critic on a roll?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we touched on it originally, and so we can kind of explain this a little bit further, is criticism and judgment.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that's one of the most prolific and, most experienced approach. I think humans have, for thousands of years, experienced and offered criticism and judgment. And so it's definitely an opportunity to start to choose to shift that. It's one thing, and maybe it's an understanding that we talk about, is the difference between criticizing and evaluating.
Yes.
Right. And so maybe it's just even when we talk about definitions and we want to learn that about ourselves. Okay, well, if I criticize, that's usually a negative approach. But if I evaluate, that's an observational approach, devoid of any emotion to it. It's just, much like we were talking about when we go back and look at our childhood, pulling some of that emotion out so we can just understand and observe. So words like observe or evaluate are less emotional in terms of the definition of that action versus criticizing, which has a negative connotation, a negative energy, a negative hold to it. Both can yield what we're looking for, but have a different intention behind it. So when we can observe individuals or evaluate individuals or observe and evaluate ourselves instead of criticize, that can help us make a different choice in terms of silencing our inner critic and creating a more positive mental mind frame and even clarity of our emotional experience from that.
And if you're someone who grew up in a household where maybe criticism and judgment was the norm, part of it is having compassion for those who participated in that, because it was a cycle, right? There, generations before, it was almost like a survival mechanism. And I'm not saying that makes it right or wrong. It simply was a state of being for many, not all, but for many. But again, it goes back to that choice. And you're going to hear us say that so many times in our podcasts. How then do you choose to break that pattern or that cycle? And as you said, shifting into evaluation, what does that even look like? Okay, so what are some tangibles about, all right, if I'm not criticizing, I'm evaluating. What does that look like? Well, criticizing might be, why are you so stupid? Can't you see it looks like this? And you do it like this. Where an evaluation would be, I see that you missed this step. So would it be beneficial if we went over the steps once again? So it's two completely different feelings for the individual, especially a child who's receiving that, right? One, the child takes on a ton of shame, right? I am so stupid, especially if it's a parent saying it to them. Where the other is like, oh, I simply made a mistake. Mistakes are part of the growth process. That's okay. And then my guide in this world is willing to guide me one more time until I learn all of the steps that are necessary. Two completely different flows versus criticism and judgment. I was just judged and criticized for making an error versus I was observed and evaluated and then shown one more time.
That's a beautiful example. And I think the reason why it's so important to pull these two together is because criticizing and judgment makes it about the person, in observation and evaluation makes it about the action.
Yes.
And so having that differentiation is so key, because we all make mistakes. It's going to happen. We all do something that we just either didn't intend or anything like that. But that doesn't define who we are. That doesn't make us who we are. Like, I've done tons of stupid stuff, looking back, hey, why not? It's how we learn. And I'm not criticizing myself, just observational. I could have done that differently, yeah. And that's okay. And we can laugh about it, and that makes it fun. So when you're observing it, I know that I'm not stupid, but that action was probably not my smartest, and so, and it brings humor into it. It brings a whole different vibe to it when we can view it from that perspective, because it's not tearing the individual down because an action doesn't define an individual. Because again, that takes it back to what we've talked about in the beginning. That makes the outside define the inside. By observing and evaluating, we're switching it. We're saying, no, it's the inside that creates the outside. Okay. And so if it's outside of you, that means it can be adjusted
right
from the inside. And so, hey, if you're going to make a mistake, that's fine. Then let's just go over that step again, and we'll do it until you get it right. And then you'll become, second nature to who you are and what you're doing. And so there's so many approaches that we can do. And that's why I love this understanding of, it's not about the person, it's about the action. And then the person can be uplifted to shift the action. It's really hard to do it the other way. If it's all about the person, then the action doesn't tend to really shift. It tends to even maybe double down or get even worse, because the person feels so bogged down and has so much weight from that energy.